Welcome to the dungeon. Dum dum dum. If you heard by now, there is no other person on this call. It's just me. Just me dum dumming. Because it's been just me for the past month. If you've been following this podcast this entire time, you knew that we delivered episodes every single week. And since the 17th of April, there just hasn't been another episode. If you follow me on Facebook and Instagram, you know that a few weeks ago I posted something where I said, I haven't heard from Andy in 18 days. That was the case at that time. By now, it's been 5 weeks since we last recorded an episode, and almost 5 weeks since I last heard from Andy. This episode, I want to explain what happened from my perspective. I want to share where I'm at, what my journey has been since we last recorded an episode. And lastly, I want to talk about what's coming up. So all that is in this episode. Okay? So you've been a part of our journey if you've been listening to this podcast. If this is your first time listening, hi. We got drama. But on the 17th of April, Andy and I recorded an episode. I heard from him. We talked on the episode and I published it. Then I think we briefly had a hello on Thursday. And on Friday, that would be the 19th of April, was the last time that I heard from him. I don't remember what the exchange was on that day, but it was just hello, how are you doing? That type of thing. Right? So, and that was the last I heard from him. The Sunday afterwards, we did not speak on Saturday. I did not reach out to him. He didn't reach out to me on Saturday. The Sunday after that, which would then be the 21st, was when I added the clips from the podcast episodes together to create a reel for Instagram and Facebook. And I sent it to him and I said, what do you think? He saw that message, but I never heard a response. And I have never heard a response from him since. From that time on, I've called him on WhatsApp. I've called him on the phone. I've reached out to another number I had of him, or somebody around him. I don't really know whose number that is. He gave it to me for something in regards to shipping. That number, when I messaged that number, told me Andy's okay. I'll tell him you were looking for him. But again, I don't know who that number is or who that number belongs to. I also reached out to 2 mutual friends, people that I know personally. One said he doesn't know. The other person, a girl, said that he'll let him know. A few weeks later, which was last week, she came back to me and said, Andy still hasn't reached out to you. I told him to do it. And so from what I'm understanding from the information that I have, Andy is okay physically. I do not know anything else. I don't know if something did happen in his life. I don't know if something is happening on an emotional, mental, spiritual level. I do know that he's very busy, which he has shared about on the podcast as well. I don't know. This is for me the first time in my life that somebody has completely ghosted me, where I just haven't heard anything from them. So it was weird. It was very weird. And I've been through a journey of processing and dealing with how I feel, what I think, and what I can do about it, right? What I can do about it is very limited. We can start there. I've emailed, reached out, called, sent voice messages over and over and over and over again on a regular basis up until last week, where I sent a voice message and I said, this is where I'm at, this is what's going on. And I have not like continued reaching out. If to me that felt like the final, I'm not gonna continue trying, right? The only thing I haven't done is send mail, like postal mail, but I don't want to do that either. So that's where we're at with the situation. And what I can do about it, nothing else. I don't even know 100% like where to find him. So I can't like even fly out if I wanted to. So that is the situation. How I've been feeling and dealing with it on a mental basis has been very interesting, and I want to share that as well. First of all, I would like to apologize for not keeping our word. And I know it's not my fault. Like I'm not saying it is my fault, right? But I do believe that together we've created something, and we've created a expectation, and we've said it out loud with our words that you can expect a episode from us every single week, which hasn't been delivered. Now again, it's not my fault, but at the same time I apologize that that hasn't been happening. The reason why I apologize is because I think our words are very important. When we give our word, we have to keep it, right? Not gonna say that depending on the circumstances, like I understand circumstances, I understand that things happen, I understand all of that, but I do believe that when you break your word, you have to apologize. It's important, or at least it's important to apologize, and that's why I'm doing that right now. Andy did not keep his word, right? He did not keep his word to me that we're going to meet every week to record an episode. He did not keep his word that he's a friend that I can reach out to, that I can go back and forth with. None of that has happened. So to me, I kept using the word weird in the beginning when it first started happening, because I was like, this is weird. This is so not like him, right? And I just hoped and prayed that he was okay. And at the same time, I was very disappointed, like really disappointed, as in, like, why? Why would you do that? And he knows that I'm somebody that, at least I tell him that. I think he knows. I can't speak to that, but I tell him all the time, you can come to me with anything. And I'm like this with everyone in my life. I'm like, you can come to me with anything. I can understand. As long as you can respect my boundaries, right? Like, don't cross the line and start attacking me. Like that, I don't take. I do not take that. But if something's happening, if you say I need a break, if you say something happened, I can't talk to you about it, any of those things are completely welcome in my book. Like, I understand. I don't understand completely ghosting me, right? So the word weird was the word that I used a lot in the beginning to explain what was happening. Yesterday I talked to a friend and she asked me, you don't seem angry about this. And I said, I'm not. I really am not angry. Disappointment, yes. Sad, yes. Weirded out, yes. All that. But I'm definitely not angry. And it's not a resistance to anger, it's just a feeling that hasn't come up with me in this instance. And I think that has to do with the long standing relationship I have with Andy, right? Where it's like something must have happened. Something must have happened. And there's that compassion there for me on my end of like, I hope he's okay. This is somebody that I value, that I love, that I care about. I hope he's okay. That to me is very important. But at the same time, as I said, he did break his word. And that to me is unacceptable. So that's how I feel about it. It's very exhausting. It's been a grieving process, really. And at the same time, I've been thinking about the lessons that Andy taught me, right? Because I feel like every relationship, there's like a specific lesson that you learn. And with Andy, it's been very clear what those lessons are. One of which he has said on this podcast specifically. I remember one time specifically, I'm sure he said it more than once, but he used to tell me this on a regular basis, almost daily, right? That Sheedia, you need to value yourself. Well, he never said Sheedia. Shay, you need to value yourself. Right? And that was something that has helped me grow and shift so much. Value my word, value the work that I put in. Like I remember a conversation I had with him once privately that I said, I barely work. And he said, Shadia, you know how much work you put into things? And he said it on the podcast when he said that you do so much. And I do so much, but it's just like my work is so much fun that I don't consider it work. And so he helped me value that work, that just because it's fun doesn't mean it's not valued, right? And another thing he talked to me a lot about was to not allow people to hold me back, right? To not be weighed down by people. We had a specific conversation the week before he ghosted me, that week before, where there were two people that were not respecting my boundaries at all. Not at all. One of which I talked about on the last episode, where I said, I shared my rape story, and this person was like, oh, I wish I could have been there. And I was like, you couldn't have been there. Oh, you don't know that. And I'm like, it happened to me, right? So I would know. So we had this conversation, and there was so much more that happened. And Andy told me, Sheedia, those aren't people that add to your life. And don't allow yourself to be weighed down by those people and those situations. And so these two lessons have been coming up a lot for me. And these two lessons have contributed to what I decided I'm going to do with this podcast. And that is to move on, right? To move on, continue with the podcast without Andy. Not to do solo podcast episodes like this one, because I do not enjoy that. I did it with my own podcast. I used to have a podcast that was called, or it's still there, you can listen to it, Growth Thoughts. If you're on Spotify, you can see it in more like this. It will recommend that podcast. But anyway, I did not enjoy it that much. That's why I stopped doing it. That's why I'm doing this one originally with Andy, right? The deal was for Andy and I to continue doing this the entire time. But as I was reflecting on what to do next, like what's my process of what to do next, I decided, oh no, let me explain the process, right? At first, the exact day that Andy missed the podcast recording because we had an ongoing um, time that I had to wake up at 5 o'clock. We both had to wake up at 5 o'clock, but it was easier for him than it was for me based on his schedule to record these episodes. And so I woke up at 5 and he didn't show up. After that day, I was really disappointed because it was a long day for me. I had to start way before I wanted to, and he didn't show up. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine that also knows Andy personally. And he told me, Sheedia, I'm sorry. Like, not Sheedia, Shay. All my Jamaican friends call me Shay. Shay or Shay Shay. But he said, Shay, I'm really sorry. Is there any way you can continue with the podcast without Andy? And I said, I don't know. Like, I'm not in that space to think about it. But I knew that I didn't want to have a new guest every week. Like, that's not something that I wanted to do. That's why this agreement with Andy was like such a perfect thing because I can talk to him for a long time. But then a few weeks later, someone else asked me, so what's going on? She then said, this podcast needs to go on. Is there another way you can bring in other guests? And I thought about that because it's clear I don't want to bring in a new guest every week. It's also clear that I don't want to get into a place where I'm putting in or making it a long-term commitment with one guest like I did with Andy. It just didn't feel right. That felt like completely replacing him. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more about replacing him. But that didn't feel right either. And so what I settled on, the idea that came to me is I want to have co-hosts for 10 episodes at a time, going back to the fact that Andy and I did 10 episodes together. And so kind of like honoring that pattern and bringing in a co-host for 10 episodes at a time. That felt good to me. And so the process has begun to find this person. There's a few people that I would really love to work with. Scheduling and like details need to work out, to be worked out. But there is one person in particular that I would really, really love to have to work with next, because I feel like the relationship that I have with her and her experience will continue what I started with Andy perfectly. But that's still up in the air, right? And I'll be completely open and honest about this once I know more for sure. And I'll name names and all that stuff once I know more. Okay? And something is more clear. But that's what I've decided I want to do. I want this podcast to be little seasons of 10 episodes where we would have a different guest every time. And the benefit of that is that we can go deep, like if I have a new guest every time, you're getting to know this person for, let's say, an hour max, and then it's done, versus when we're having one person for a long time, we can create that together. Andy and I had this conversation on the podcast. We were like, we create together, right? Like, it's a community podcast. It's not just me and Andy, it's a community podcast. And that's why, to me, it's important to, one, continue, and two, have this explanation of what's been happening and where I'm at with it, because I think it's important. Now, there is two sides to every story. I really acknowledge that, and it's important to me to hear both sides of the story, except I cannot reach Andy to have his story told. Now, I'm completely open to have his side of the story told anytime he wants to, right? But right now, so far, I haven't been able to. I just haven't. So you just hear my side is all you can get right now. um. So yeah, it's going to continue in a new format. I don't know as yet when that will happen. I can't make any promises, but it's going to. Now, on my journey of dealing with all this, it's been a loss for me. Yes, it's a loss for the podcast and the community we've created here, but I literally lost a friend that I spoke to every single day. He's not there anymore. At least not now. And so at first, I was in this, hardness of it all and be like, fuck it. I don't need him. I have other friends and I'm going to talk to my other friends and that's going to be okay. And quickly, I had to realize that that wasn't filling in the void. There is nothing that's going to fill the void that is Andy. He cannot be replaced. We're all unique human beings. Just like you, whoever you are listening right now, you can't be replaced. There's a unique composition of experiences and personality and gender and excitement and all this stuff that makes you you that cannot be replaced by anybody. And I think once I kind of came to that conclusion that Andy can't be replaced, it allowed me to ground and settle and accept, you know? And so I wanted to mention that here because when I say I'm going to continue with someone else, it's not because I'm going to replace Andy. This other person cannot fill in the shoes of who Andy is, but they can fill in their own shoes, right? You're not going to get the same conversations, the same insights, the same wisdom as you got from Andy. I'll still bring mine, but at the same time, there are things that he could pull out of me, right? That's not the right. There are things that he brought up because of who he is within me that's not going to be brought up with other people. Like I said, I mentioned 2 lessons that I've learned from him that's very valued to me. But what we can expect that when we talk to other people, when I bring in another co-host, we're going to get another perspective. And this person is going to bring something else out of me. And I'm going to bring something else out of this person. And that's what I can promise, I just cannot promise Andy anymore. What I just lost my train of thought for a moment. But yeah, it's important to acknowledge that. And one thing I will also say is I feel like there are 2 parts of me that are showing up right now in regards to when I think about Andy. There's a part of me that's just sad and disappointed and not okay with not hearing from him, especially since I made so much room for it. And there's that other side of me that's compassionate and worried and concerned. And these 2 sides clash a little bit, And they also clash a little bit in my decision to move on. A part of me wants to say, hey, I got to hold space for Andy and I got to have compassion with whatever he's going through. But also, at the same time, I can't do that with somebody that has broken his word. And at the same time, this exact same person has taught me not to be held back by people. So it's uncomfortable. If I look at it from a coaching perspective, and I show up as a coach in this conversation, it's me saying I'm holding the void, that unknown, that duality of holding both spaces at once and not knowing. And it's uncomfortable. I've actually talked about this on the podcast too. I think it was episode 9, where I said, I've learned to understand that men in particular, and men in the Caribbean in particular, carry a lot. I've been privy to hear very horrible and painful stories that men in the Caribbean have experienced. Not to mention, Caribbean stories in general, like that's already something, but specifically from a male perspective and the male experiences that they've experienced. We've talked about that too when we talked about YWAM and how they used to make these men stand up and say their debts out loud, which was horrible to experience because I knew how much that broke them, And so I've talked about it on the podcast of having compassion towards men in particular, but at the same time, not taking their shit. Right. And so this is me kind of embodying that. I talked about it with Andy. Now I'm embodying it. So that's what's going on. Now, what can you expect specifically? I would love to hear from the community in regards to this, right? You out there listening to this dungeon, as I said, we create together. Now, I shared my truth. I think it's important. It was very important for me to share it. One, because that's who I am in general, but two, because in the Caribbean, we do not talk about things a lot. It's the Caribbean, it's a Black community. This has to do with transatlantic slavery and all that stuff. We push things under the rug. We do not talk about it. We don't look at it. And at the core of that, oftentimes, is we're afraid of what will happen if we look at it, if we deal with it, if we process it, or if we face it. The consequence of doing that is we're held back. We do not live up to our potential because this thing under the rug, it needs to be kept under the rug. And if that rug is keeping you from your next level, you can't move from that rug, right? If moving that rug is what needs to happen in order for you to see your next level or experience your next level, you cannot experience that next level because you have to keep what's under the rug under the rug. And there's so many secrecy within the Caribbean culture that do not serve us. This is the entire premise of why we created this dungeon podcast. And so I would love to hear what your thoughts are. What your thoughts are on the situation with Andy, what your thoughts are on my approach to it, what your thoughts are to my views. What has this brought up for you? On the last episode, Andy said something. He said, none of our stories are indigenous to us. Right? He said that in the context of what each one of us experience is often similar. And even if it isn't exactly the same, there's something we can learn from each other, from sharing those stories, right? So I think it's important to hear from you. And so on Spotify, you can leave a comment and share your thoughts. I would love that. If you don't use Spotify, these episodes are published on YouTube, so you can leave a comment there if that's where you're listening. But Facebook and Instagram are the platforms that I use the most. There you can find me at Hey Sheedia. So Hey as in Hey, and my name, Sheedia. I will also leave the information on how to reach me in the description of this video that you can be able to reach out. Depending on the community's thoughts and what you share, I will likely create another episode. But also, depending on if after this I feel like I need to share something, I will create another episode. And this is because this loss needs to be processed, right? And I'm not going to obligate anybody listening to do anything. Like, you don't have to share anything, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But if you feel like it, I would highly encourage you to do so, right? Like, let's process this as a community. Now, don't be afraid of other people's opinions. Don't be afraid of hurting my feelings. Be unapologetically you, right? My word for this year has been unapologetic. And something that I feel is important and beautiful that Andy has made space for me for is to be unapologetically myself, specifically in this podcast, because this platform has allowed me to own my voice and speak my truth in a way that I hadn't done before. So be you, speak your truth, say what you want to say. Because I think that allows each and every one of us to grow. And that is a beauty that we can get out of this very unfortunate turn of events. Okay? So, sound off. Let me hear what you got to say. If you look up my name on Google, you'll find so much about me. I'm like such a public person. Sheedia, Sheedia is my name. And yeah, reach out on social medias, Instagram, Facebook, my website. You can check that out. You can also message me if you have my number. I'm not going to give out my number publicly. But yeah, let's continue this conversation. And if nobody answers, nobody responds, then I might not create another episode. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, we will. There's more to come on the dungeon. I just cannot guarantee as to what it is. Just stay tuned. I got you. Right? See you on the next episode. Whenever, wherever that is. Well, it's going to be here. Whenever that is. Bye.